Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined by Aldershot FC and Aldershot Town historian, Pete Stanford. Now, Pete and I are going to go through the story of Aldershot FC and Aldershot Town. Aldershot FC, of course, the club founded in 1926, and Aldershot Town, the club who were formed in 1992-1993. So we're going to go and dig into all of the history and the elements surrounding Aldershot and their demise, the establishment of the Phoenix Club, and how things are going for them now. So as I said, Aldershot FC were founded in 1926 and they joined the Southern League, which was one of the lower tiers of English football back in the day. Their first win was against Grays Athletic, which was a 4-0 drubbing. And I suppose the first thing that kind of comes to my mind, Pete, that I wanted to ask, were Aldershot founded from a military regiment? Because of course the town of Aldershot and the area surrounding it has a huge connection to the military, doesn't it?
I mean, obviously, it was a big, there was a big military presence, back in the early to mid 1800s. A lot of the soldiers would play football, and then there are reports that the officers had a club in the 1860s, but then that didn't I don't think there's any direct connection between that and the formation of Aldershot FC. But so I think the main activity for football was amongst the army. But then, as you said, Jack White, the sporting journalist, and Llewellyn Griffiths, they started getting the idea of getting a civilian club in December 1926.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was encouraged that army regiments play football to keep the soldiers fit.
The army physical were based in Aldershot. So.
Yeah, correct. So a lot of them would end up founding football clubs based on that. Cricket was quite...
Colours actually come from the Royal Engineers.
Royal Engineers, okay. I think there's one team from Scotland, one of the Highland regiments, who were actually quite nomadic. So even though their sort of base of operations is in Aberdeen, they never actually held a home ground at all. So they're one of these clubs that kind of falls between the cracks because they had no geographic home. So they're quite an interesting one. But obviously cricket was quite popular amongst the regiments as well, and when the winter months came and they couldn't play, they adopted football as a part of that. So I was just quite keen to know, just quite interested to see if that was the case. But in any case, Aldershot FC, or the new club if you want to call them that, they really kind of struggled in the first few decades of their existence. They were up and down a lot of the time. They never really finished anywhere above mid-table. So, kind of a bit mediocre, to be honest, when they first started out. So then we enter the post-war era, eventually, just after years of not really doing much, to be completely honest. And you enter this sort of weird period for football in England where, obviously England won World Cup in the mid-60s, but the benefits of that really stayed at the top of the pile, and they never really trickled down to the clubs that were in what would become non-league or the lower divisions.
It's similar to what they do today. You very rarely get players outside the top division playing for England. Peter Taylor and Steve Bull, in the 70s and 80s respectively, were the only exceptions I can really think of any note. And I just think, it's when you see like things like the big match revisited and stuff, that was quite good because you used to, Aldershot would be on the big match, even if they were in Div 4. And, back then they'd have a Div 1 game would be the main game. They might have another Div 1 game and a Div 2 game and a Div 4 game. So they were quite good, but I still think it was a world away from what we've got today. And I think there was a big gap between the lower divisions and the top division at the time.
I totally agree with you, Pete. And I think it's a few different things. The advent of professionalism obviously done a lot, especially to clubs with low memberships, and that had lower attendances and that side of things, but also for teams who are a bit more remote and based more remotely, because what you see then is these teams struggle to cover the costs of the travel to see teams that are further away from them or beat teams like that and pay, depending on what league you're in.
Fans as well. I mean, we were only talking about this just before the end of the season. You didn't used to get many of our fans when the old club was in existence going to away games.
Mm.
Whereas now, some of the games we'll take 1,000 fans away. Back in the 70s and 80s, you get a minibus
Mm.
and that'd be it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's it. And if the football club is struggling to cover the cost of travelling and the gate receipts, depending on what league you were in, obviously the rules
Yeah.
might be quite different. And then that's when you start to see breakaway leagues. The breakaway league collapses, and then clubs end up in financial ruin because of it. It's a very, very vicious cycle, and it was a pretty brutal time for a lot of football clubs. Just in the early years. To be fair, the early years of any football association or football league trying to get off its feet can be quite brutal for many clubs. And I think it might just be the case that a lot of lower league teams really, really bore the brunt of that, and that's why. But I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, really out with that though, there wasn't a whole lot to scream and shout about for fans like yourself, Pete. But in Aldershot, they did manage to attract large travelling supports. One such example, they took 19,000 fans away to Carlisle in the FA Cup one year. There's a couple reasons why that could have happened, and I'll go on to explain them in a little bit. But that's a huge following, especially to Carlisle, which I think I probably would be right in saying it still is the case now. That's the farthest away that you can get for the majority, if not all, fans of lower league football in England.
Again, this is something I've talked about a little while back with a group of people. And no one can really give me an explanation because, we'd also played Manchester United in the FA Cup the following season. And the Carlisle crowd was bigger than the Man United crowd. And no one could really tell me why.
Suppose, from an Aldershot perspective, I know Manchester is still very far away, but Carlisle is the furthest away you can get.
Yeah.
It's the away day, so and it's still quite a revered away day from a lot of people.
One of the places I've been the coldest I've ever been at a football match, and it wasn't too bad because we were winning 1-0 till the 88th minute, and then Carlisle equalised.
You've never been to Dingwall on a Wednesday night in the middle of a Scottish winter. To be fair, neither have I. I've just heard stories. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where a lot of what makes an away day is the stadium and the club that you're going to visit. So it could have been the case that because it was an exotic away day, if you want to use that term. Don't think that word's ever been used to describe Carlisle before, but maybe because it was a bit further away and stuff like that, then it kind of spurred more people on to go. But also maybe it seemed more achievable as well at that time. Were Aldershot in the same sort of division as Carlisle? Were they there or thereabouts?
I think Carlisle might have been the division above.
Yeah, okay, I've got you. So then moving into the 70s, Aldershot finally got a bit of success and they got the promotion. It was a pretty strong team that you had then, Pete, wasn't it? I think that was the 72-73 season.
Yeah, I mean, the players that I can remember seeing, Murray Brodie played, Malcolm Crosby, Ray Dean, Dennis Brown. There's loads of players that, people of a certain age would say were absolutely brilliant. Tony Godfrey in goal. Jack Howarth was the goal getter. He arrived partway through the season. He's revered even now. I mean, unfortunately, he was just before my time. So I never actually saw him play, but from what I hear, he was amazing. A couple of weeks before the end of last season, we had a load of them invited back, and they were presented to the crowd at halftime. They were guests of the club. So unfortunately, there's a few of them are no longer with us. But yeah, it was that sort of thing. The old players always get a fantastic welcome back. Upon story of how they absolutely destroyed other teams.
No doubt. I mean, it's nice to hear, obviously, that they're well remembered for their achievements and ability, though. I suppose it's probably a really, really good time for you as well. And, maybe some people will be calling you a glory hunter. Only joking, of course. But, this was around the time that you started following Aldershot as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, 78, 79 was my first season. But, from where we got promoted to Div 3, we finished 8th in the first season. And then that proved to be a little bit of a false dawn because that's the highest up the pyramid that the old club ever finished. Unfortunately, they then finished 20th in 74, 75. And they went back to Div 4 at the end of 75, 76. They finished 17th in 76, 77. Then 77, 78, they just missed out. They finished fifth. Fifth again in 78, 79. Brentford picked us in 77, 78. Barnsley picked us in 78, 79. Wimbledon got promoted in 80, 81. They were 5 points ahead of us and 2 places.
I mean, the football must have been decent then if it was enough for you to fall in love with the club.
Yeah, it was. It was very attack-minded. The crowds were picking up, and I'd say we were a middle to sort of top half-ish side.
Might be quite good for our listeners as well. If anyone listening who is an Aldershot fan has been following them for as long as you have, what was it like back then? Just going to the games. Tell us a little bit about what you do just in the day to day when you were going to matches.
Well, I mean, for me, back when I started, I was only 15, so unfortunately, I was never in pubs at that age. And the other thing for me is I used to live in a town that's about 7 or 8 miles away.
I see.
Long before I was driving, and we didn't have a car, so I used to actually cycle the 7 or 8 miles to every Aldershot game that I went to.
That's very, very impressive.
And
your eyes must have been like steel.
Tuesday night, wind, rain, snow, sun, the lot.
Yeah, and it must have been fantastic going up and down the country, travelling to watch your club as well. I mean, some of those away days in the 70s for the league that you were in, oh, man, like they must have been absolutely outrageous. Like just some really, really fantastic away days in there as well.
Yeah, Portsmouth, Reading. I need to wash my mouth out. Yeah, they, you'd get 5-figure crowds for them. The likes of Sheffield United in the 81-82 season. They bring big crowds, and we had a massive crowd at for Division 4 at the time. 5-figure crowd at Bramall Lane for a Division 4 game. Even our home crowd, in that especially that 81-82 season, there were only 2, 3 and a bit thousand, and then you'd have the likes of Sheffield United they'd have 4, 5, 6 times the crowd we had. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of my favourite pieces of football trivia is that Aldershot were one of, if not the first team to ever be promoted via the playoffs. Were you there in person to see those matches, Pete?
I went to the 2 home legs because back then it was what I wish they'd bring back now. It was the one of the teams that finished outside the bottom of Div 3 relegation would play. There'd be 3 clubs then from Div 4. So we ended up playing Bolton, who finished down near the bottom of Div 3. And we beat them on aggregate home and away. So we relegated them. And then we played home and away against Wolves and played them off the park. It was marvellous.
I mean, yeah, at that stage, beating Wolves would have been taking a massive scalp. Probably a bit of a shock at the time as well.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the big gripe they had, and understandably, I mean, they finished 9 points ahead of us in the league. So, but it's just one of those things. Everybody knows the rules at the start.
Yeah, that's the thing. Those are the breaks. It's the playoffs. If you're not get the automatic spot, then that's what you have to deal with. And I think you might have answered it already, Pete. But just while we're on the subject to the period of the 70s and 80s, what's your favourite memory? What was your favourite match? Again, I feel like you've maybe already answered it with the. But was there any others that really stick out? Whether it was atmosphere, whether it was the result, the football that was played, or the fights.
I mean, I'll never forget my first ever Aldershot game. That was an FA Cup 5th round tie against Shrewsbury, and we were winning 2-1 at home, going into injury time. And it was one of those ones where one of our players gets a ball and you just want him to boot it into row Z, and by the time the ball had come back for throwing, the referee would have blown. Unfortunately, he went to play it to one of his own players who just at the wrong time turned his back on it and it bounced out to a Shrewsbury forward just outside the penalty area, and he blasted it in for an equaliser.
Oh no.
I was gutted. And then we lost the replay, and we would have played Wolves in the next round. And then if we got through that, we would have played Arsenal. The playoff games, although I didn't actually go to the game at Wolves because unfortunately I didn't have anyone to go with, and I wasn't really confident back then enough to go on my own because I used to be quite a shy lad back then. I still am now, but a lot of people tell you I'm not. So unfortunately, I didn't actually go, and it's one of my big regrets. You know, I'll never know what it was like there because I didn't go.
One of those things. These things happen though, and I understand it as well. Just the guy that I normally go to the football with, he's in his 70s, and unfortunately, he's not in great health at the moment. So he's not been to a Celtic game for quite some time. So I've largely just been going myself, bar the odd game.
Yeah.
So I know a few people that go. I don't get the bus from the town that I'm from or anything, the supporters bus. So it's just normally go myself. And I know what you mean. It can be off-putting sometimes. It's like if you don't have the people to, then it's something that kind of not hampers it, but you know, that's what part of makes it going to the football. You go with your friends.
Yeah.
You go.
And you know, I mean, sometimes I look back and think, why on earth didn't I go? You know, so what? Why didn't I go?
You know, hindsight's a great thing, isn't it?
Oh, it is a marvellous thing. Absolutely marvellous. 87, 88, Sunderland were in our division. We had a really good game. It was, you know, they were the big club coming to our place. And they went ahead twice, and we came back and won 3-2. And the winner from Steve Berry was a cracker, belter.
I mean, it's a shame though, and I can imagine coming into this period, that was probably one of the last good memories that you actually had of supporting Aldershot for a while. Because when we get to the 90s, things started really going downhill for the club, didn't they? I mean, the debt especially was through the roof, which obviously for any football club is a massive concern when you're in this amount of debt.
Well, the actual debt when they went out of business was around the 1.2 million mark. But the debt that supposedly pushed them over the edge that led to the bankruptcy and the liquidation was a £20,000 bill to a brewery. 89-90 we finished 22nd, when we finished 23rd, and 91-92 we didn't even finish.
When you put it like that, it really puts it into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it was Spencer Trithway, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was in charge at the time, wasn't it? Easily and without doubt one of the most hated figures in the history of Aldershot Football Club and probably football in Aldershot in general.
Well, he seemed to come out of the blue when we initially had some problems a couple of seasons before, and it was quite strange. You know, there was a winding up order. Let me get my facts right. Yeah, there was a winding up order in July 1990, which is, like you said, that's the 495,000. And then he came out and he said that he had a load of money and was going to save the club. You know, he ended up going on the Terry Wogan show. He was a 19-year-old. Yes, he was a 19-year-old property developer.
Alarm bells ringing. That's a big red flag.
Yeah. He very much looked the part, very well spoken. I think he was just a local guy who wanted to get involved with his local club. And, you know, I suppose I have to be very careful what I say, but it didn't work out. Say that, you know, there was a subsequent expose in the News of the World.
Yeah, I mean, the exposure and everything that surrounded that eventually led him to being found guilty of fraud in 1994 or something like that as well. And you know, so obviously he's not the kind of guy that you want running your football club, regardless. And ultimately, you know, it was, you know, the worst thing that could have happened to the club was him stepping in charge of it. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's another thing. You know, hindsight is a marvelous thing. Desperate times at the time. There was a lot of stuff that went on behind the scenes that the general public and the fans didn't know. I mean, you know, I've only found out things in the last few years. So, or rather, I've been told things in the last few years. So let's just say that. So, some people aren't bothered by it. Some people are. Some people say, "Oh, it was a long time ago. Does it matter?" Well, it matters to some people. It's. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I've got to be careful what I say. So
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. It's one of those situations. But sadly, though, this guy stepping in was ultimately the reason that Aldershot ceased to exist. And then in 1992, Aldershot were expunged from the league, which is always a curious term for the bureaucrats to use.
It's a marvellous word, isn't it? The annoying thing about that, when you look back, is it got to a point it was the next home game could be our last home game. The away game could be our last away game. And it went on like that for weeks and weeks to the point where everyone was, obviously I'm not going to speak for everyone, but a lot of people thought, we'll get to the end of the season and then probably go pop. But unfortunately, we went pop before the end of the season.
See, when you put it like that, every game you're going to, this might be the last time we're here. Or every away game, this might be the last time we see it.
Yeah,
it really, really hits home.
I know I was guilty of it at the time. I felt quite blasé about it. I thought, oh well, I don't think we're going to be around next season. But I didn't think at any point before the end of the season there would be the game that was our last ever game. But I didn't think it would happen.
What did that feel like? What was the mood in the stands? Because I can imagine it's kind of hard to enjoy a game of football or even stay focused watching it when you're working with a mindset that your club might not be around this time next week. I can imagine it was probably hugely difficult and hugely emotional as well.
It was. I mean, we hadn't won since the 28th of December. And in that time, the best result we got was 3 draws.
No, but the sounds of things, there wasn't much to cheer about at all, sadly. But luckily and happily, a year after the club went defunct, Phoenix Club was born. The club which are now known as Aldershot Town Football Club. So tell us about that. Were you involved in it, or did you know anyone who was involved in setting the Phoenix Club up?
I do know the people involved. I mean, the 2 main drivers was a local businessman called Terry Owens, who I know very well. I regard as one of my friends. There was also a guy called Graham Brookland who was heavily involved with the supporters club, with the old club. Again, I've known Graham many years. He's a big figure, and as far as I'm concerned, he's a friend of mine. And without those 2 and a couple of other people, Graham's brother David was involved. A guy called Nick Fryer, who was the first press officer for the new club, and there were some other people in the background. Without those, I wouldn't have anywhere to go on a Saturday. And the amount of effort and time and stuff those guys put in it's incredible.
The way you put that, it's excellent, and it's everything that we want to talk about when we're talking about clubs who went out of business in recent history.
I'm just so grateful to all 4 of them and the rest of them, because that dedication has paid off. It was brilliant. There was a couple of public meetings at a local hotel that were both attended by around between sort of 700 and 900 people, I think, were the figures. And it was, it was obvious that I wouldn't say that necessarily the town of Aldershot wanted a club, but the people that went to the old club definitely wanted somewhere to go.
When you said, it's thanks to them that you and so many others have something to do on a Saturday. I think that it really, really hits home, and it's really, really important, because football's so much more than just the game. It's so much more than the 90 minutes. Like you said, it's this kind of ritual that you go on with your family and your friends that you do at least once a week. Sometimes twice and sometimes more as well, but it's really revolving around the Saturday. I think that's a really, really fantastic point.
Yeah, and the good thing, Terry Owens, who was the club's first chairman, he had the foresight He could see the writing on the wall for the old club, so he actually applied to the, I don't know whether they were just the conference then or whatever, but he basically applied to the conference and the Beza Homes League and the Isthmian League for membership. I'm not sure what the outcome was with the conference. I think the conference wouldn't let us in. I think because, we were only a Phoenix club, and to let us into the top echelon of non-league. But eventually we were accepted into the Isthmian League. But Terry hadn't have put his applications in when he did, we wouldn't have even opened up in the 92-93 season. We'd have had a barren season and then had to start in 93-94. So his timing was immaculate.
Yeah, and there's a bit of the journey, with a big TM at the end of that. There's a bit of the journey aspect to this too, because you're having to go from essentially starting from scratch to back to the point where you feel as a club you're most comfortable at. So there is that aspect to it, but whenever we speak to people whose clubs have been reformed, it's almost like a weight off your shoulders, and suddenly everyone's buzzing again. They've got something to get behind, and it's not going to be this drab kind of, oh well, as you said, I think off air, you lost 16 games on the bounce or something like that at one point, which is dreadful. So there's a bit of a buzz around everyone again. Everyone has this common thing to get behind. I mean, what was the journey through the different divisions and the what are now known as the steps of English football? What was that journey actually like?
It was incredible, and our first ever competitive game, the opening league game against Clapton, a lot of it is a blur. I do remember us having fireworks. It was a big carnival atmosphere. There was fireworks and stuff. Some of them that went awry. I think if you tried applying today's health and safety regulations to some of the stuff that was going on, I think there'd be a few eyebrows raised. But the funny thing is, looking back, is we'd been used to 3 seasons of absolutely awful football, prior to the new club starting up. Half an hour of the first game, we were 2-0 down at home. So of course everyone thought, same, whatever, different season. And I can still remember my mate at the time saying, I don't effing believe this. And there is I think it's a bit of an urban myth now, but apparently someone threw their season ticket at the dugout and walked out. I don't remember that, but that's not to say it didn't happen. But no one's ever come forward and says, yes, that was me. And we ended up winning the game 4-2. And, the rest is history.
I mean, I think that says it all. And one thing that really struck me just there, Pete, was when you were talking about it, how happy you were remembering it. Obviously, you looked like you were getting quite emotional, and I can imagine it would have been an emotional moment for a lot of people.
That first season was just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things. Maybe as well, even if the football wasn't great, even if the results weren't great, you're just happy to be back. And I can imagine that's, even though it's come from a place of turbulence and a place of, your club's died, it must just be such a unique feeling just to be going to the games, just to enjoy them.
Yeah, I mean, that season, initially I didn't think we were a big club. Starting off, I thought, we're going to be maybe finishing halfway, maybe up near the top. And I didn't really have any expectations, to be honest. But that whole season, we went unbeaten at home. We only lost 2 league games all season. And I think the average attendance in the division the season before was 93. And I think by the end of our first season, the average attendance for all the clubs had gone up to about 1,500. Because we just we packed the grounds out. I remember one game we went to Chertsey and they had to lay special trains on. It was just incredible.
Amazing. Yeah, that's really, really special. Just an absolute romp back up the divisions. And if they're having to do things like put extra transport on, then it just goes to show how many fans actually got behind the club in that time, and how many travelling supporters were actually going to these games lower down the league. So it's indicative of the support being incredibly loyal to this new club. And as you said, you weren't really sure if the town of Aldershot wanted a club, but they missed it still. And I think that's kind of indicative of it. They might not say they want it, but it's just been such a staple, if you like, of the town for so long that it's something that they would miss if it wasn't there. So yeah, an absolutely steamrolling your way up the divisions. But then in 2008, you could say that the journey kind of reached its natural terminus for now, because you made it back into the Football League, didn't you?
That last few games, I mean, a lot of people will tell you that we effectively won the title at Torquay a few weeks before we actually did, because that was just a game where going into the last few minutes of the game, you didn't want to concede again. You just thought, just hang on, please, just hang on. The crowd was bouncing, the whole place was just incredible. And then we had one last attack, and we only went and scored in front of all the Aldershot fans to seal a 2-1 win. Cue Bedlam, with a young lad called, well, young, he's not so young now, but then a young lad called Scott Davis that we had on loan from the team that shall not be mentioned, beginning with R. He was just quality, but that night was just brilliant. So effectively, we won it then, and then we actually won the title at Exeter, where we needed a point. And I can remember I'd been really ill. I had the flu and I had a stomach infection as well. So I was and ahhing whether I was going to go. And then I thought back to the Cardiff game, where I didn't go. I didn't go to the Wolves game with the old club. So I thought I'm going to drag myself to Exeter. So I did. So I was doped up on painkillers and cold medication and antibiotics. And I made it because I thought if I go and I feel worse after that, I don't care. If I don't go and we get the point we need, I'd be gutted forever that I didn't go. And we went 1-0 down, and then we got the point that we needed, and it was just incredible. Grown men crying. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of it was a blur, and I can remember sitting on the terrace in the corner because I was just absolutely worn out.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. You get moments like that sometimes in football, and this is gonna sound like really, really daft. Obviously, I support the biggest team in Scotland, who more often than not win. We've never had to come from a place of adversity, not in my lifetime anyway. I know I hear loads of stories about the 90s. And yeah. I follow Stirling Albion. Okay, the thing is, I was speaking about this to my friend recently, and although I want Stirling Albion to do well and enjoy them, and I would even call myself a supporter of them, it's not going to be the same as supporting Celtic, because that's the team that I grew up with and the team that I've always supported. And I think the thing is that even though I've experienced last minute winners, big wins in Old Firm games, big European games and wins, etc., etc., I'll never experience that feeling of being that low down and then getting the goal that sees us go up or something like that, just something really special. And I think that's one of the things that, it's just something that I'm going to miss out on. But, again, it does sound daft because obviously I support a big team, but it's fantastic hearing you speaking about the memories and seeing all this amazing things happen. And now Aldershot are back in the National League. They're not in the north or the south, they're in the National League proper. So how things been going?
The fact they're not in the National League South is more by luck than judgment. To be honest, the last 5 seasons have been awful. We've been down around the relegation zone. 17-18, we got to the playoffs and lost. But then the season since, we've been down the other end. 18-19, we actually finished in the relegation zone. And it's only the fact that Gateshead breached financial regulations that they got demoted and we got saved. Another season we could have been lucky because there was no relegation due to COVID. And this is, I know we're not near the season yet, and we haven't signed many players, but I'm confidently looking forward to the start of the season rather than the season's coming up and I know what we're going to get. So I think he'll be a good fit for us at the moment. He came in 7 games from the end of last season, and loads of people, myself included, didn't think we were going to get out of the mire, and we did. In the last minute of our last away game, they then actually feel much better. It's going to have the same effect as if it had been scored at another time.
I always remember during Neil Lennon's second spell as Celtic manager. Sorry, the first season in his second spell, which was actually okay. It was a Wednesday night. Celtic were playing Hamilton. It was in December. I could not be arsed. But I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go. So I went along. It's freezing cold. It's raining. There's some sleet in the ground. I'm like, this is shit. So Celtic take the lead. And it's like, right, if this ends 1-0, I'll be happy. And I rarely leave the games early, only if there's, train strikes on and I need to. I remember Hamilton equalised in the 89th minute or the 88th minute or something like that. And I'm sitting there like, this is one of the worst days of my life. I can't believe I've came all the way through to watch this. So obviously, plenty of folk have left at this point and loads of folk are starting to leave. And, it's Parkhead's probably about half capacity at that point. And all of a sudden, we're up the park. It's the 94th minute and Scott Brown scores the winner. And then the next thing I know, I'm standing on the side railings going absolutely nuts. And there's people around me going crazy. There's like groups of people. And see, looking back in the highlights, the roar from the crowd was probably as loud as it was when it was full. And I know it might just seem like that in the highlights, but I just remember thinking, like, I have never seen this. Like, we're playing Hamilton. What is going on here?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know
that sort of thing often happens at Aldershot. We've got a home end called the East Bank, which is behind one goal. It's got a barrel roof on it. And, even when there's only 1,500 people in the ground on a Tuesday night, the noise is incredible.
I love a shed. I love the shed ends. It's
so and so you can imagine what it would be like, when we've had much bigger crowds. The noise sometimes is incredible. But like I say, Tommy Woodrington came in. He shored us up quite a bit, and we didn't concede too many late goals, which we'd had a habit of doing. And then the penultimate game of the season, the last away game of the season, we needed a point to survive. We didn't play too bad. We had a few chances, and we were 2-1 down going into the last minute, and I thought, no, we're going to need to get the point in our last game next week at home. We had a corner that, putting it mildly, was awful. We have a habit of not getting much air under the ball. And I was halfway through berating the corner taker when I noticed the ball in the back of the net. And it was just incredible. The our away end just went nuts.
Love it. I absolutely love it. I love the scenes that are, as you want to say that, but for such a crucial moment as well, a last minute winner for that is really, really special. They're the ones that you remember. And not to end the episode, I suppose, on a sour note. I'm hoping it's not going to be sour. Obviously, in the National League at the moment, you said you're cautiously optimistic, shall we say, for the start of next season.
Yeah, I'm certainly glad that Wrexham and Notts County have gone.
It does kind of open up a bit, I would imagine. Maybe Boreham Wood still in the league there, maybe the favourites.
Yeah, I think they'll probably be there or thereabouts. I think Barnet will be a little bit sore that they missed out through the playoffs. I don't know what Chesterfield's money situation is like, but I think they'll be up there. York seem to have a fair bit of money being thrown at them.
Yeah, York are on a bit of an upward trajectory at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah. To be honest, for me, I'd be happy with top half. I would just be happy to have a season where we're not looking over our shoulders and depending on other people keeping us up. So top half, I'd be happy, and then maybe build and see what happens the season after. I'm often known as a pessimist stroke realist, so I try not to get overexcited. I mean, I have put money on Aldershot in the past, and I have won money on them, when they've won titles. So when they won the Isthmian Prem, that won me some money, and the same when they won the Conference Premier. Both times people laughed at me and said, "Well, you'll never see that money again," and I laughed last. But yeah, I'd love promotion via the playoffs. I'd love a day out at Wembley. All the Aldershot fans want is at some point in our lifetime, we want to see Aldershot play at Wembley, and that's Wembley Stadium, not Wembley FC. Oaking in the playoff final at Wembley would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's every English fan's dream to see their club play at Wembley, isn't it? It's almost like, I don't know if bucket list thing's the right word, but, just something that everyone really wants. And yeah, I mean, it is a dream, isn't it, just to see them play there, whether it's in the playoff or the FA Cup. And how are you feeling about the future of Aldershot right now?
We went into administration in 2013. Depending on who you listen to, we're all right, we're not all right. So I don't know. There's plans to redevelop the ground.
Okay.
Which are, there's some recent fans forum. We were shown some plans which look really nice.
Excellent. Good. It's transparent.
Pardon?
It's transparency from senior management within the club. It's always a good thing.
Yeah. So some of that looks really nice. So that's all due to be happening, all finishing off by about 2026, cool. Which would be nicely in line with the centenary of football in Aldershot.
Nice. Yeah, that's a very good date.
That'll be a nice plan if that works out. Like I say, some of the plans and the animations we've seen are quite nice.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a cause for optimism then, if you're a Shots fan.
Yeah, slightly. Yeah, but we'll see.
I suppose if given the administration back about 10 years ago,
the
club being lost again, and obviously what's happened still within recent history, I can imagine
a lot of people said if it went again, they just wouldn't bother if it reformed again.
So you're just enjoying the good times while we're here.
Yeah. I mean, personally, if it had gone pop again, I'd have still gone to the new club.
Yeah, entirely fair. Entirely fair. Mm-hmm. No, listen, Pete, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic episode. I think you've really, really encapsulated what a lot of fans feel. Yeah, I think
babble at times, but
no, it's all absolutely fantastic.
Just a football team.
In terms of the emotion and the experiences that you've had and just the things that you said as well, it really captures all what being a football fan's about. It captures how people feel when their clubs are taken away from them as well, which I think is really important. It's good that we've got these lived experiences on and you're obviously coming on to tell us about that. So thank you very much for your time.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but just going back to when the original club did go bust, I can remember there was a few of the lads I used to play football with, who were Aldershot fans. So we actually went up the ground that evening just to see, what was going on and, maybe take one last look before it all got locked up. And it was really weird, as we were walking in, bailiffs were walking out, carrying furniture and, paperwork and stuff. It was really strange.
Yeah, it's grim.
I'd say there was a good couple of hundred people there and, people were standing and sitting in their normal places. Grown men were crying. I went and sat in places that I'd never sat. So I sat in the dugout. I sat in the director's box. And then a load of us just sat in the centre circle, putting the football club to rights. It was, a strange but memorable evening.
Yeah. Obviously it's an emotional moment, but the thought of you guys sitting in the centre circle, man, it's a scene, like it's a picture, but obviously the moving forward from that, Aldershot came back and you guys are able to go to the games again, which is fantastic.
Just before we wrap up, Pete, why don't you tell our listeners the name of your book?
It's called The Phoenix is Risen, an A to Z of Aldershot Town. And what that does is, my timing was perfect on it. It came out in the summer of 2008, which coincided with, we just won the conference premier, just getting ready for our first ever season in the Football League.
Yeah, perfect.
Well, listen, Pete, thank you very much for joining me today to discuss everything to do with Aldershot FC and Aldershot Town. This has been a brilliant episode and maybe one that we'll revisit again in the future, because there's a couple of really, really interesting themes that we can discuss a little bit more of here. But, I think that picture at the end of you guys just, being in and around the stadium, seeing it in ways that you wouldn't normally see it, as a way of saying goodbye is a really, really powerful image and something that hopefully a lot of our listeners will resonate with, even if it's been in a negative sense that they've lost their club. Of course, thank you once again to all of our listeners who have tuned in for this episode. If there's a topic or subject that you want us to cover related to football history or heritage, please get in touch. You can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. We're more than happy to cover anything related to football history or heritage, whether that's club identities, club politics, fan identities, community clubs, club cultures, you name it. We're more than happy to cover a whole range of things. So please do get in touch with us and have a chat with us, and we'll see if it's something we can fit into the podcast. You can also check out our website, that's footballheritage.co.uk. That's where all of our written content lives. Some really brilliant stuff going up there from our contributors. So if that's more your bag and you fancy giving writing a go, then get in touch and we can see if we can make that happen as well. But for now, Pete, say goodbye.
Thanks, Rory. Good night, everyone. Take care.
And it's a goodbye from me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.